2,000 years ago, at the dawn of the 1st century, the world was ruled from Rome. And Rome, within a few short years, it would stretch from Britain across Europe to southern Egypt, from North Africa around the Mediterranean to the Middle East. It would embrace hundreds of languages and religions, and would till those diverse cultures into a rich soil from which Western civilization would grow. Rome would become the world's first and most enduring superpower, spanning continents and epochs.
Thousands of years in the making, what began as part of a religious festival honoring the Greek god Zeus in the rural Greek town of Olympia has today become the greatest show of sporting excellence on Earth. The inception date in 776 BC became the basis for the Greeks' earliest calendar, where time was marked in 4-year increments called Olympiads. What could it be? Why, it's the Olympic Games, of course.
Olympia in Greece, where the ancient Olympic Games were held, provided the flame for the 17th modern Olympiad. A girl representing Hestia, the hearth-goddess, called Vesta by the Romans, led the ceremony. The flame had been kindled by the rays of the sun, and now it was to start its long journey to Rome, a journey by land and sea to the 1960 Olympic Stadium. The sun blazed down on the opening day of the Olympiad, in which 86 nations were competing.
No event in the ancient world was comparable to the Olympic Games. They were held every 4 years and without a break for nearly 12 centuries. The Games were almost 800 years old when Jesus Christ was born. And it took a special Christian edict to stop them 4 centuries after his death. The ancient Olympics were abandoned and long forgotten, but returned in our modern age as the inspiration for the most prestigious sporting event on Earth. What gave these ancient games their extraordinary magnetism, their endurance, and the power to rise again 1,400 years after their demise? A magnificent complex of temples, gymnasia, racetracks, and workshops covering 60 acres. And it took the collapse of an empire, barbarian invasions, and a Christian edict forbidding further use of pagan structures to bring the games down.
Some of them would go for the religious aspects as a kind of pilgrimage. I think the sports fans would go there to see the best athletes in the world.
By 448 BC, the Olympic Games are already at least 300 years old. There are other athletic festivals, but the Games at Olympia are by far the most important. The World Cup and Super Bowl of ancient Greece. The spectacular 4-horse chariots.
Greeks are sports fans because they were all practicing these sports. Boys grew up wrestling, boxing, running. All of these sports were in their blood, as it is in today. We, the Western civilization, and the Greeks are the only two people who put sports so central in our culture.
Diagoras was very much thought of as godlike, because it was believed if you're going to be a great athlete like Diagoras, the only way you could achieve their success was if you were descended from the gods.
As the Olympic Games grow in importance, cheating becomes so rampant that a row of statues to Zeus, paid for by disgraced cheaters, is erected at Olympia. Only the pedestals remain. Cheating is a high-risk game because not only the judges, but the gods are watching.
It's helpful to remember that for the Greeks, religion and sports, whether it's chariot racing or boxing, were not separate activities. The Greeks believed that the Greek gods were very much like human beings, more powerful, but generally with the same likes. And if the Greeks liked sports, then they thought that the gods would like sports performed in their honor as well.
And a lot of Americans have wondered whether we are an empire just like Rome. And so they make comparisons between what is probably one of the most famous things about ancient Rome, which is the incredibly well-trained Roman army.
It's pretty easy to draw parallels, isn't it? It's pretty easy to be able to say Rome was a militarily dominant state with a cultural hegemony that was in many, many ways driven by its economic strength, its economic might. We are all of a sudden concerned that the model that we have of Rome is going to happen for us. It's going to happen to us.
When I talk about the influence of ancient Rome in America in the 18th and 19th century, I say that it was the wallpaper of the world. It was really hard to go anywhere in America without being confronted with evidence that Americans loved ancient Rome. But mostly they liked to decorate in a style that we call neoclassical, which meant using architectural elements like columns that were Roman or gesturing to Roman ideas. And they like to have furniture in the style of ancient Rome, and certain pieces of furniture, like the sofa, were in fact modeled on ancient Roman precedents. American women during a certain period between about 1800 and 1830 liked to dress in a certain style of clothing that today people called empire style, but in fact at the time was called a Grecian robe. Why were the founding fathers interested in ancient Rome if they themselves were trying to rid themselves of an imperial power, that is Britain, which was the largest empire in the world since ancient Rome? And it's true, the founders actually loved Rome because it was a republic, and that is what they tried to emulate when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, when they wrote the Constitution. Later Americans, though, began to be much more interested in the Roman Empire as the United States began this sort of relentless expansion across the continent and then across the oceans. The image of the Roman Empire, as opposed to the Roman Republic, began to really capture their attention. This has especially been the case, of course, in the last 10 years. Does that mean that a kind of ignoble fall awaits us in the future? And what will be the source of that fall? Will it be internal moral rot and corruption, or will it be external attack? The dangers are real on both counts, and I think that's one of the reasons why Americans have been preoccupied with the question of whether we are an empire in the image of Rome.
Why don't you explain to people who don't have history degrees about the comparison between ancient Rome, which was the most powerful nation on earth at the time, and then it fell, to America today?
It collapsed of its own weight. Government grew. The parallels are interesting. There was just increases in taxes, increases in abuse by leaders, not following the Constitution. They devalued the currency. You're showing gladiator fights. They had gross spectacles, which people had to pay for. Then when people complained, they bribed them with welfare. Very similar.
Rome, the eternal city. It was founded over 2,700 years ago by twin brothers Romulus and Remus. For centuries, the people and emperors of Rome ruled the known world. Through war and conquest, they dominated the entire Mediterranean and controlled a territory which spanned 3 continents. It was home to legendary figures like Julius Caesar and Augustus, but also to crazed emperors Nero and Caligula. Rome's history is a violent one. It was a civilization founded on bloodshed and lust, and would eventually destroy itself in the same manner. Every day, we're surrounded by common symbols which owe their meaning and lasting appeal to the Romans. For instance, the Great Seal of the United States shows an eagle clutching arrows in one leg and an olive branch in the other. Imagery such as this is usually interpreted as uniquely American. The eagle, however, was not always a symbol for American nationalism. In Roman mythology, the eagle was the companion of the chief god Jupiter, and it was used widely throughout Rome, adorning statues and temples. It was also used by the military, which carried standards with the bird of Jupiter mounted on top. During World War II, the Nazis held party rallies and demonstrations while carrying Roman standards which were topped with the eagle. At the same time, fascist dictator Benito Mussolini, who envisioned Italy becoming a new Rome, also used ancient Roman symbols, including the fasces. It was a tool carried by Roman civil servants known as lictors, in order to preserve the peace or hand out punishment. Even the word fascism is derived from the ancient Roman tool. It also appears in numerous forms throughout the United States, representing strength or justice. In the mid-1st century BC, Julius Caesar replaced the old Roman calendar, which had 355 days, with a new one, reorganized with 365 days, with one leap year every 4 years. January from Janus, god of doorways and beginnings. February is derived from the Roman festival of Februa. March is the month of Mars, the god of war. April comes from the Roman month Aprilis. May for the Roman Maya, goddess of spring. June is named after the queen of the gods, Juno. July gets its name from Julius Caesar, who rededicated the month after himself. August was renamed in the same fashion after Augustus, first emperor of Rome. And September, October, November, and December simply mean the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th month. Even in America, founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams hung on every word of Roman writers like Sallust, Tacitus, and Cicero. Many of the buildings of ancient Rome have been lost to time, but we're left with a small piece of their majesty. One of the most influential pieces we have is the Pantheon, a temple which was dedicated to all the gods. Its design, which is quite different than other temples in the Roman world, due to its square column front and large dome interior, has been replicated in almost every state capitol building in America, including the Capitol in Wisconsin. Sports fans as well owe some debt to the Romans for their architectural endeavors. Modern stadiums, which itself is a Latin word, are modeled after amphitheaters, a must in any great Roman town. The most famous of them is undoubtedly the Colosseum. Romans also loved going to the races at the Circus Maximus, a large oval track used for chariot racing.
Isaiah is letting us all know that in the spirit, there's going to come a time when the greatest city on earth, the greatest country on earth, America, Babylon the Great, shall be persecuted. And brothers and sisters, you're living in that time now. Okay, they thought this place was the land of milk and honey. Right. A lot of you Negroes thought this was the promised land. No, this is the land of your captivity. This is the land where you're meant to repent here to be delivered from here.